Hi everyone, welcome to my kitchen. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how I go about preserving the harvests from my garden. We've had a pretty cold and wet summer here this year. There haven't really been any big gluts of anything, so this won't be one of those homesteading videos where I spend all day canning green beans or whatever it is. My approach is probably more little and often. I tend to preserve things as and when they're ready in smaller amounts rather than doing everything in one big go. My favourite way to preserve food is with the freezer. I think the food stays really good quality that way, and personally I find it easier to incorporate it into my cooking. My favourite book for freezing food is this. It's called Freeze Fresh by Crystal Schmidt. She goes through lots of different fruits and vegetables individually and tells you the best way to freeze them. And she's also got lots of really good recipes in here, so I would really recommend this if you're interested in learning more about freezing your harvests. This video might be more useful for smaller gardens or allotment holders rather than people who've got acres and acres of growing space. I don't have a chest freezer. I don't really have a huge amount of freezer space, but I think it's quite surprising how much you can fit in a smaller space. I do think that freezing is probably the best preservation method for smaller scale gardeners. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways I like to use to freeze my vegetables, and I'm going to show you one of my favourite recipes for using frozen squash. We'll also have a quick look at some of the other methods I use to preserve my vegetables throughout the winter. Let's get started. I'm just going to freeze these French beans that I've harvested today. So I've washed these and chopped them, and they're ready to go in my steamer pans. I'm going to steam blanch these for about 3 minutes, and I'll give them a stir at the halfway mark. This variety is called Marvel of Piedmont, and you can see they do lose some of that vibrant colour after cooking. Now I've drained the beans into ice cold water to stop them cooking anymore. I've laid the beans out on a towel and I'm going to let them dry before I pack into a freezer bag. I've managed to put away about 2 full bags of beans for the freezer this year. I wouldn't call it self-sufficiency, but it'll still be nice to have a taste of the garden in the winter months. If you've watched my garden tour video, you'll know that my squash harvest this year is looking pretty disappointing. Last year was a different story. I grew a variety called Boston Winter Squash, and as you can see, they didn't do too badly. One way to use this squash is to roast it up in big chunks and then scoop out the flesh and put it through a blender. Then you end up with this beautiful bright orange puree, which freezes really nicely. This frozen squash is really versatile. You can bake it into cakes, breads and pumpkin pie, or it makes a delicious base for a soup. One of my favourite ways to use it is in this pasta sauce recipe I'll show you now. This recipe is really flexible, but I like to use 2 cups of frozen squash, some bacon lardons or pancetta, double cream, parmesan, fresh sage, an onion, 4 cloves of garlic and a chicken stock pot. Start off by frying the bacon so that the fat renders and it gets nice and crispy. Next up, add the onions and cook until soft. Then add the garlic and cook for a further couple of minutes. Add the defrosted squash and stir to combine. Then add the sage, chicken stock pot and a good splash of double cream. Let the sauce simmer together for a few minutes. This recipe is easily adapted. If you'd rather not have meat, you could leave out the bacon. Just make sure to replace it with something with a similarly salty and savoury flavour to balance out the sweetness of the squash. You could use parmesan or nutritional yeast, something like toasted pine nuts or maybe miso paste would work really nicely here. Cook the pasta of your choice, and just before it's done, take out a mugful of the cooking water. Combine the pasta and the sauce, using your reserved pasta water to emulsify the sauce. And that's it! Season to taste, serve with parmesan, and enjoy your homegrown squash all year long. I've just been out picking this tray of calendula or marigolds. I'm going to put it in my airing cupboard now and leave it there for a couple of weeks until they're completely dried out. Then I'll pack it away into a jar like this one that I can then use in teas. This is how I like to freeze my leafy greens. So there's spinach, chard and kale in these little cubes, and they're super handy just to chuck in whenever you're cooking. I use these large ice cube molds to freeze the greens after they've been briefly steamed. I got this method from Freeze Fresh. Just pause the video now if you'd like to read. Now let's talk about carrots. It's really important that you don't wash your carrots before you store them away. These carrots were freshly harvested from the garden and then I packed them straight into freezer bags like this. Add a piece of slightly damp kitchen roll to the bag. This will help to regulate the moisture levels and stop your carrots going rotten. In my experience, carrots stored this way will last for months in a cool, dark cupboard or in your fridge. One way that we really love to store our carrots is this honey butter carrot mash recipe. Chop up your carrots into chunks, I never peel mine, and then steam them until they're tender. Add butter, honey, salt and pepper and blend to a smooth consistency. I'll put the recipe on screen now if you want to take a screenshot. To freeze, I spoon the mash into these super cube molds. You can fit quite a lot of these frozen blocks into a freezer bag, and they lie flat in the freezer to save a lot of space. I really like these super cubes. They're not the cheapest, but I think they're worth it because they're really sturdy and good quality. I've got this 250ml size and I use them all the time for storing leftovers and preserving food from the garden. I found a couple of handfuls of beetroot ready in the garden today and I thought they'd do nicely for this quick pickling recipe. I'll link it for you in the description below. I boil the beetroot whole until they're easily pierced with a knife. After that, the skins will just easily peel off. Yeah, your kitchen is going to look like a crime scene, but it's all part of the fun. This is a quick pickling recipe, so it isn't shelf stable. You'll need to keep it in the fridge and eat it within a couple of weeks. But because it only makes one jar, that really isn't that much of a challenge. As for storing my veggies, I tend to keep a lot of things in this big cupboard, which is in the coldest room in my house. At the minute I've got some garlic in here which I'm keeping for seed, and some potatoes that I've recently harvested. If there was more I would probably put them in a sack. I tend to use old chicken feed bags, but there's not very many here at the minute and we'll probably get through these quite quickly. I got this food dehydrator for my birthday last year, but I have to admit I've barely used it. It's definitely something that I need to experiment with more. I'd love to hear some suggestions if you've got any. One thing that I have made in the dehydrator is these apple rings. We've just got the one mature apple tree in our garden at the moment, so we just eat most of the apples fresh, but I kept some aside to try these apple rings and we really like them. They're tasty on their own just as snacks, but we like them chopped up and stirred through porridge as well. One of the best things in the garden this year has been the garlic. I wanted to grow 52 bulbs, one for every week of the year, and I ended up with about 85. So everyone that's been to visit our house recently is left with a bulb. We made this drying rack out of spare bits of wood and chicken wire, and then left the garlic to dry out for about a month. After that I braided them and now they're hanging up around the house. For any split or damaged bulbs, I peeled all the cloves and then put them away in this container in the freezer so that nothing goes to waste. I hope you've enjoyed this look at how I preserve and store some of my harvests here on the Croft. Please let me know if you've got any questions, suggestions, or if there's anything else you'd like to see. Thanks for watching!